Ethan Carter sat in stunned silence as the alien guards dragged him through the enormous metal corridors of the Zeeth battleship. The walls shimmered with strange blue energy, and the air smelled of something metallic and unfamiliar. His heart pounded in his chest. Just an hour ago, he had been flying his cargo ship through an empty sector, minding his own business. Then, out of nowhere, a massive Zeeth warship had appeared, captured his vessel, and pulled him aboard. Before he even had a chance to protest, he was lined up with other terrified prisoners in front of the alien princess herself, Soraya. She had taken one look at him, pointed a sharp-clawed finger, and said, "I want him." Now, here he was, a prisoner, or worse, her property. The guards pushed him into a grand chamber, unlike anything he had ever seen. Towering pillars of dark metal reached high above, decorated with glowing symbols. Strange floating creatures zipped around, carrying pieces of armor and weapons. At the center of the room stood Princess Soraya, watching him with an unreadable expression. She was tall, nearly a foot taller than him, with deep violet skin and golden eyes that seemed to pierce straight into his soul. She wore a dark armored suit that shimmered in the dim light, and a flowing cape draped behind her. Despite her alien appearance, there was something oddly graceful about her. Ethan swallowed hard. He had seen enough stories about humans being captured by aliens. This usually didn't end well. Soraya took a step forward, her boots clicking against the polished floor. "You are mine now, human," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You will serve me." Ethan clenched his fists. "Serve you? As what? A pet? A slave?" His voice dripped with frustration. Soraya tilted her head, as if studying a strange new creature. "Neither. You are different, unpredictable. That is useful." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Useful for what?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to a large window overlooking space. Below them, a massive fleet of Zeeth warships floated like silent predators. "My people expect me to follow their traditions, to take a strong warrior as my consort. But I do not follow traditions. I make my own path." Ethan's stomach twisted. Consort? Was she serious? He took a step back. "Look, I think you've got the wrong guy. I'm just a cargo hauler. I'm not special. I don't even like fighting." Soraya turned to him with a small smirk. "That is what makes you interesting." Ethan didn't know whether to feel flattered or terrified. Maybe both. Before he could respond, the doors opened, and a heavily armored Zeeth warrior entered. He kneeled before Soraya. "Princess, the High Council demands to know why you have chosen a human instead of one of our own." Soraya's smirk widened. "Let them wonder." Ethan sighed. He had a bad feeling about this. Ethan Carter sat on the cold metal floor of his new room. It was more of a cage than a living space. Bare walls, a strange glowing door with no handle, and a single bed made of some kind of soft alien material. He had been here for hours, trying to process everything. He wasn't a prisoner, not exactly. He was something else, something worse. He had been claimed. Princess Soraya had chosen him for reasons he still didn't understand. She called him useful, but for what? Was he a political tool? A science experiment? A joke? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden sharp noise. The door shimmered and disappeared. A Zeeth guard stood outside, his violet skin glowing slightly under the corridor lights. "The princess summons you," he said in a deep, rumbling voice. Ethan sighed. "Yeah, sure. Not like I have a choice, right?" The guard said nothing, just turned and started walking. Ethan followed, his mind racing. They entered a massive chamber filled with alien warriors. The air smelled of metal and something spicy, like burning herbs. The Zeeth soldiers stood in a wide circle, whispering in their own language. At the center stood Soraya, dressed in dark, shining armor. She looked completely calm, like she had planned all of this. Ethan stopped at the edge of the circle. "Oh, what's happening?" Soraya turned to him, a slight smirk on her face. A test. Ethan's stomach dropped. A test for what? Before she could answer, a massive Zeeth warrior stepped forward. He was at least 7 feet tall, covered in thick armor, and had sharp, curved blades attached to his wrists. His glowing yellow eyes locked onto Ethan like a predator spotting easy prey. The crowd grew silent. Soraya finally spoke. In our culture, strength is everything. My decision to choose a human as my consort has been questioned. She gestured toward the massive warrior. So, they demand proof of your worth. Ethan's heart pounded. Wait, proof? You don't mean? The warrior lunged. Ethan barely dodged, stumbling backward as a blade slashed past his face. The crowd roared with excitement. What the hell? Ethan shouted, ducking another attack. I'm just a cargo hauler, not a fighter. Soraya watched, arms crossed. Survive. Ethan cursed under his breath. He had no weapons, no armor, no training. The Zeeth warrior was faster, stronger, and had every advantage. But Ethan had something else. Desperation. As the warrior charged again, Ethan threw himself to the ground, rolling to the side. The Zeeth's momentum carried him forward, and he crashed into a pillar. The crowd gasped. Ethan saw his chance. He grabbed a fallen metal rod and swung it as hard as he could at the warrior's head. There was a loud clang, and the alien staggered. Soraya's smirk widened. Interesting, she murmured. Ethan panted, still gripping the rod. He wasn't sure if he had won, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. Ethan Carter sat in his dark room, still shaking from the fight. His hands ached, his muscles screamed, and his heart hadn't stopped pounding since he faced that massive Zeeth warrior. He had survived. Barely. But what scared him the most wasn't the fight itself. It was Soraya's reaction. She had enjoyed it. She had watched him struggle, watched him nearly die. And at the end, she had simply smirked and said, "Interesting." Like he was some kind of experiment. Ethan clenched his fists. He had to get out of here. There was no way he was going to be some alien princess's plaything, some human trophy she could parade around. He needed a plan. The Zeeth were powerful, but they had one weakness: arrogance. They thought of humans as weak, as nothing more than lesser creatures. That meant they wouldn't expect him to fight back. He got up and moved to the glowing door. There was no handle, no visible way to open it. But he had been watching closely. The guards used a small wrist device to control the doors. If he could get one of those, he could escape. The only problem: he had no idea where he was in the ship, and even if he got out of this room, he had no weapons, no allies, and no ship. Still, it was better than sitting here, waiting for whatever twisted game Soraya had planned next. A few hours later, the door shimmered and disappeared. A single guard stepped inside, bringing a tray of food. Ethan moved fast. Before the guard could react, Ethan grabbed the tray and smashed it against his head. The alien staggered, dropping the wrist device. Ethan lunged, snatching it up and slamming his fist into the guard's throat. The Zeeth gasped, choking, and fell to the ground. Ethan didn't wait. He ran. The corridor outside was dimly lit, stretching in both directions. He had no idea which way led to freedom, so he just picked one and sprinted. The ship was massive, filled with strange glowing symbols and sleek metal walls. Alarms blared. "Damn it," Ethan muttered. They knew. He turned a corner and nearly ran into 2 more guards. They raised their weapons, but Ethan pressed a random button on the stolen wrist device. The lights flickered, and suddenly, a door behind them slid open. Without thinking, Ethan dove through it. The room inside was enormous, filled with holographic maps and towering screens. And standing in the center, waiting for him, was Princess Soraya. She didn't look surprised. Ethan skidded to a stop, panting. His hands clenched around the stolen device. Soraya smirked. "You really thought you could escape?" Ethan's stomach twisted. She wanted him to try. and that terrified him more than anything. Ethan Carter stood frozen, breathing hard. His escape had led him straight into the jaws of the beast. Princess Soraya stood before him in the massive control chamber, her golden eyes locked onto his. The smirk on her face made his skin crawl. She had expected this. Ethan tightened his grip on the stolen wrist device. "So, what now?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Do I get punished for trying to leave?" Soraya chuckled, her voice smooth and amused. "Punished? No. I am impressed." She took a slow step forward, her cape flowing behind her. "The others thought you would cower in your room, waiting for orders. But you acted. You adapted. That is why I chose you." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Chose me for what?" She tilted her head slightly. "For something greater than you realize." Before Ethan could respond, the room's massive screens flickered to life. Holographic images of powerful-looking Zeeth figures appeared, elders with deep violet skin and glowing eyes. Their expressions were hard and unyielding. A deep, commanding voice filled the chamber. "Princess Soraya, you have defied tradition. You were meant to choose a warrior of the Zeeth, yet you bring this human." The last word was spoken like an insult. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He didn't know what this was, but it sounded like something important and dangerous. Soraya remained calm. "The High Council fears what they do not understand," she said, her voice strong and unwavering. "Ethan Carter is more than just a human. He is unpredictable, adaptable. He has already proven that he is more resourceful than many of our own warriors." One of the elders scoffed. "He is a wild card, nothing more. A fragile creature from a weak species. What can he offer the Dominion?" Ethan clenched his jaw. He was getting really tired of being talked about like he wasn't there. Soraya smiled, but there was something sharp behind it. "That is exactly why he is valuable." She turned to Ethan. "Tell me, human, what do you think would happen if the Zeeth and humanity went to war?" Ethan blinked. "Oh, we'd lose." Soraya raised a brow. "Would you?" Ethan hesitated. The Zeeth were bigger, stronger, and more advanced. But humans had never been easy to conquer. History had proven that time and time again. Soraya continued, "Your kind fights differently. You do not rely on strength alone. You fight with chaos, with strategy, with defiance. That is why I chose you. That is why they fear you." Ethan swallowed hard. He wasn't just some random pet to her. He was a weapon. The High Council was silent for a moment. Then the lead elder spoke. "You risk much with this gamble, Soraya. If the human fails, it will be your downfall." Soraya's smirk returned. "Then I suppose we will see." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't sure if he had just won something, or if he was about to lose everything. Ethan Carter sat in silence, staring at the holographic screens in front of him. His heart pounded as he processed what had just happened. Princess Soraya had used him as a weapon in her political game, proving to the High Council that humans were unpredictable, dangerous, and valuable. And now, because of her gamble, he was stuck in the middle of a brewing war. The moment the High Council ended the transmission, Soraya turned to Ethan, her golden eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You did well," she said. Ethan scoffed. "Oh yeah. And what exactly did I do?" He threw the stolen wrist device onto the floor. "You played me like a damn chess piece." Soraya took a slow step toward him. "I tested you," she corrected, "and you passed." Ethan clenched his fists. "I never agreed to be part of your power struggle. I just want to go home." Soraya's smirk faded. "You still do not understand, do you?" She gestured toward the massive screen, where images of warships flickered. "The moment I chose you, the moment the Council saw what you could do, you became a target. If you leave now, they will hunt you, kill you, and then they will erase your species from existence." Ethan's blood turned cold. "You're bluffing." Soraya's gaze hardened. "Am I?" Ethan wanted to argue, But deep down, he knew she was right. The Zeeth High Council saw humans as a threat now, and when powerful empires felt threatened, they destroyed what scared them. His hands trembled as he ran them through his hair. So what? You expect me to fight for you, to help you take the throne. Soraya's expression softened, just for a moment. I expect you to survive. Before Ethan could respond, alarms blared through the ship. The lights dimmed, and a robotic voice echoed through the halls. Warning. Enemy ships detected. High Council forces are engaging. Ethan's stomach dropped. What the hell is happening? Soraya turned to a nearby console, her fingers flying across the glowing controls. The Council is not waiting. They want me dead now. The ship rumbled violently, and Ethan stumbled as explosions echoed from outside. He rushed to the window and saw flashes of light, warships clashing in the darkness of space. The High Council had sent an entire fleet to eliminate Soraya. A Zeeth officer ran into the room, his face pale. Princess, our defenses are failing. We must retreat. Soraya's jaw tightened. No, we fight. Ethan turned to her in disbelief. Are you insane? They outnumber us. Soraya smirked. And yet you humans always find a way to win impossible battles, don't you? Ethan exhaled sharply. He had never wanted to be a part of this war. But now, standing in the middle of an alien battlefield, he realized there was no turning back. Like it or not, he was in this fight. Ethan Carter gripped the edge of the control panel as another explosion rocked the ship. Red warning lights flashed across the command room, and the alarm screamed through the air. Outside, the High Council's fleet had surrounded them like hungry predators, their warships launching a relentless barrage of plasma fire. The Zeeth officer turned to Princess Soraya, panic in his glowing eyes. Princess, our shields won't hold much longer. If we don't escape now, we'll be destroyed. Ethan expected Soraya to panic, but instead she smiled. Good, she said. Ethan blinked. What the hell do you mean good? We're about to be blasted into space dust. Soraya turned to him, her golden eyes fierce. Because now, they are confident. Now, they think they have already won. Ethan had no idea what she was planning, but he had learned one thing about her. She never played a game unless she had a winning move. She pointed to a holographic display, showing a massive warship hovering at the center of the enemy fleet. That is the Judicator, the Council's flagship. If we take it out, their forces will fall into chaos. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. Great. And how do we do that? Politely ask them to self-destruct. Soraya chuckled. Not quite. But I have a plan. And it requires you. Ethan groaned. Of course it does. Soraya leaned in. Your human mind works differently from ours. You see angles my people do not. If you were leading this attack, how would you break their formation? Ethan hesitated. He was no military strategist, but he had played enough war simulations back home to recognize a weakness. He studied the holographic display, searching for a flaw. Then he saw it. Their fighters are too close to their own ships, he muttered. They're relying on their size to intimidate you. But that just means if we force them to fire while we're inside their formation. Soraya's smirk widened. Their own cannons will do the work for us. Ethan exhaled sharply. That's a hell of a gamble. Soraya nodded. Then it is a good thing I enjoy gambling. She turned to her officers. Take us into their formation. Full speed. The Zeeth crew hesitated, shocked by the reckless order. But when they saw the determination in her eyes, they obeyed. Ethan braced himself as the ship roared forward, diving straight into the heart of the enemy fleet. The Council's forces reacted in confusion, hesitating for a moment, just long enough. Soraya gave the final command. Now. Their ship twisted sharply, dodging between enemy vessels as the Council's cannons fired. Plasma blasts meant for Soraya's ship instead slammed into their own warships, setting off a deadly chain reaction. Ethan watched in awe as explosions erupted across the fleet. Within seconds, their careful formation collapsed into chaos. Soraya turned to Ethan. "You see, unpredictable is a powerful weapon." Ethan swallowed hard. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was winning. Ethan Carter had never felt more alive or more terrified. The battle outside was a chaotic mess of fire and destruction. Soraya's gamble had worked. The High Council's own ships were tearing each other apart in the confusion, their powerful cannons blasting into their own fleet. But they weren't safe yet. A massive explosion shook the ship as the Judicator, the High Council's flagship, turned its full attention toward them. It was the biggest warship in the fleet, bristling with weapons, and now it was locked onto them. "Princess, they're charging their main cannon," a Zeeth officer shouted. "If they fire, we won't survive." Ethan's stomach twisted. They had made the council panic, but a cornered enemy was the most dangerous kind. If that cannon fired, it wouldn't just destroy Soraya's ship. It would wipe out everything nearby. Soraya's golden eyes narrowed. "Then we stop them before they can fire." Ethan clenched his fists. "How? We don't have the firepower to take that thing down." Soraya turned to him with a knowing smirk. "But we do have something better." Ethan hesitated. "Please don't say another crazy plan." Soraya simply gestured toward the display. "You're a human. Think like one." Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. Fine. Let me think." His eyes flicked across the holographic map, analyzing their position. The Judicator was powerful, but it had one weakness: size. It was built for control, not speed. Then it hit him. "The engines," he muttered. "If we can disable their thrusters, they won't be able to dodge their own fleet's fire." Soraya nodded approvingly. "Now that is human thinking." Ethan turned to the crew. "We need a direct hit on their engine core. Do we have any torpedoes left?" A Zeeth weapons officer hesitated. "We have 2, but their shields are too strong. They will not break through." Ethan's mind raced. He needed an edge, something unexpected. Then he looked at the debris field forming from the battle. Wreckage from destroyed ships floated everywhere, massive chunks of metal drifting through space. And that gave him an idea. "Can we use the debris?" he asked. The officer blinked. "Use it how?" Ethan grinned. "We fire the torpedoes after we launch a chunk of wreckage at them. If we time it right, the debris will smash into their shields first, weakening them just enough for our torpedoes to get through." Soraya chuckled. "Clever." She turned to her crew. "Do it." The ship's cannons fired, launching a massive hunk of destroyed metal straight toward the Judicator. The flagship's shields flared as the impact hit, sending a shockwave through the ship. And then, fire torpedoes. The torpedoes streaked through space, slipping through the weakened shields and slamming into the Judicator's engine core. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a massive explosion erupted from the rear of the Judicator, sending it spinning out of control. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. They had done it. The tide of battle had turned. Ethan Carter watched as the Judicator spiraled out of control, its engines engulfed in flames. The flagship of the High Council was crippled, and with it, the enemy fleet's coordination had collapsed. Some ships tried to retreat, others hesitated, confused without their leader. But Soraya wasn't finished. "Target their remaining command vessels," she ordered. "Do not let them regroup." Her officers moved quickly, launching precise attacks at the scattered enemy ships. One by one, the High Council's forces fell into complete disarray. Ethan exhaled sharply. "I can't believe this is working." Soraya smirked. "Victory is not just about power, Ethan. It is about knowing when to strike." The battle was almost over, but Ethan knew the High Council wouldn't give up so easily. They were wounded, but not defeated. And that's what worried him. "Princess," one of the officers said urgently. "Incoming transmission from the Judicator. It's from Elder Vare." Ethan tensed. the lead elder of the High Council, the sane one who had doubted him. Soraya's expression remained calm. Put him through. The holographic display flickered, and the image of Elder Vare appeared. His face was lined with anger and desperation. You think this is over, Princess? His voice was cold, sharp. You have doomed yourself. The Council will never accept you now. Soraya's golden eyes burned with defiance. You are wrong. The Council will accept whoever wins. Vare scowled. You have allied yourself with a human, a reckless, chaotic creature that does not belong in our empire. His gaze shifted to Ethan. You are nothing more than an accident of war. Ethan crossed his arms. Yeah. Well, this accident just outplayed your entire fleet. Vare's face darkened. You cannot see what is coming, human. The Zeeth Dominion does not forgive weakness. And you, Soraya, have made a critical mistake. Soraya raised an eyebrow. And what mistake is that? Vare's lips curled into a cruel smile. You let me live. Before anyone could react, the Judicator's broken engines roared back to life. Ethan's eyes widened. What the? Princess, they are overloading their core. A Zeeth officer shouted. They're turning the Judicator into a bomb. Ethan's stomach dropped. If that ship exploded, it wouldn't just destroy them. It would wipe out everything in this sector. The High Council was willing to die just to take Soraya with them. Evasive maneuvers. Soraya commanded. The ship lurched forward, engines roaring, but Ethan could see it wasn't fast enough. The Judicator was going to explode. Ethan's mind raced. There had to be a way to stop this. A weakness. A last move. Then he saw it. The Judicator was barely holding together. If they hit the right spot, they could trigger the explosion before it reached critical mass, taking out the ship without wiping out everything nearby. Ethan turned to Soraya. We have one shot at this. Soraya met his gaze. Then we do not miss. Their final gamble had begun. Ethan Carter felt his heartbeat pounding in his ears. The Judicator was seconds away from exploding, and if they didn't act fast, they were all going to die. Soraya turned to her crew. Target the Judicator's core. Fire everything we have. The weapons officer hesitated. Princess, if we miscalculate, we don't have time for doubt. Ethan shouted. Do it now. The ship's cannons roared, sending a barrage of missiles and plasma fire toward the wounded Judicator. The enemy flagship shuddered under the assault, its already damaged hull cracking apart. Then, a massive explosion erupted from within the Judicator, consuming the ship in a blinding flash of white-hot energy. The shockwave rippled outward, shaking every ship in the sector. Ethan braced himself as their vessel trembled violently. Alarms blared. Sparks flew. For a moment, he thought they were done for. Then, silence. The screen cleared, and Ethan saw the battlefield. The Judicator was gone. Nothing remained but burning wreckage drifting through space. The High Council's fleet, leaderless and broken, had already begun retreating. Soraya let out a breath. It is over. Ethan slumped into a chair, exhaling sharply. We actually did it. The crew cheered, but Soraya's expression remained serious. She turned to Ethan. This victory changes everything. The High Council will never forgive this. Ethan sighed. Yeah, I figured as much. He looked at her. So, what now? Soraya's golden eyes softened slightly. Now, we rebuild. The Zeeth Dominion must change if it is to survive. She gave him a small smirk. And I believe a certain unpredictable human will be useful in that. Ethan groaned. You're not letting me go, are you? She chuckled. Not yet. Ethan shook his head, but he couldn't help but smile. He had been dragged into an alien war, nearly died a dozen times, and somehow helped overthrow a corrupt government. And as much as he hated to admit it, a part of him didn't want to leave. He stood up and stretched. All right, Princess. Looks like I'm stuck with you. Soraya smirked. I believe the word you are looking for is chosen. Ethan rolled his eyes. But deep down, he knew she was right. His adventure wasn't over. It was just beginning.